The dawn of the 21st century brought with it a new shadow of war. In the wake of September 11, 2001, the United States found itself consumed by a doctrine of preemption, convinced that threats beyond its borders could not be allowed to mature. As the world debated, planned, and protested, the White House and Pentagon turned their gaze toward Iraq. To them, Saddam Hussein was more than a dictator. He was a symbol of defiance, accused of harboring weapons of mass destruction and suspected of ties to terrorism. Whether the evidence would hold up or not, the momentum was already unstoppable. By early 2003, the gears of war had begun to grind, and at the center of this massive machine was the United States Army, preparing for what would become one of the most audacious and lightning-fast invasions in modern military history, the storming of Baghdad. When Operation Iraqi Freedom was launched in March of that year, the plan was as ambitious as it was risky. Rather than a slow and grinding advance, the architects of the invasion envisioned a shock and awe campaign, designed to break the regime's back before it could effectively respond. Air power would rain down precision-guided munitions on key targets, while ground forces would surge deep into Iraqi territory, bypassing strongholds and slicing straight to the heart of the capital. The enemy's will, it was believed, could be shattered by speed, by overwhelming firepower, and by the psychological weight of inevitability. For the American soldiers waiting on the borders of Kuwait, the mission was both daunting and intoxicating. In a matter of weeks, they might change the course of a nation. The opening hours set the tone. Cruise missiles roared over Baghdad, their tails of fire etching the sky before vanishing into explosions that lit up the night. Television audiences around the world watched in awe and horror as cameras captured the bombardment, buildings shuddering under the force, smoke rising like black banners above the city. For the Iraqi population, it was a terrifying introduction to what lay ahead. For the American commanders, it was the first stroke in a carefully choreographed dance of violence and precision. On the ground, the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division began its push northward. Columns of Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and armored Humvees rolled through the desert, engines rumbling like an unending thunder. Behind them, supply convoys stretched for miles, carrying fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Soldiers braced themselves against the sandstorms that swept the desert plains, cloaking the horizon in red and yellow haze. Yet through grit, determination, and relentless training, they pressed forward, often advancing hundreds of miles in a single sweep. The speed of their movement stunned observers. The plan was working. Iraqi defenses seemed fractured, confused, and unable to mount a coordinated response. Still, the road to Baghdad was not without blood. At Nasiriyah, Najaf, and Karbala, pockets of resistance erupted, catching the Americans in moments of vulnerability. Ambushes from Fedayeen Saddam fighters turned quiet highways into kill zones, and suicide attacks struck convoys. For the young soldiers who had never seen combat, the realization came quickly. This was no exercise, and the enemy was determined to resist in whatever way it could. In the searing heat, under the constant threat of small arms fire, RPGs, and improvised traps, the march continued. Each battle left scars. Each engagement etched new memories of comrades lost. The psychological toll was immense. For many troops, this was the first time they had seen the reality of war up close. The civilians caught in crossfire, the fear etched on faces of families who wanted only to survive the uncertainty of who among them was friend and who was foe. Yet their mission demanded focus, and with every mile they closed in on Baghdad, the sense of inevitability grew stronger. Morale was sustained by the belief that the faster they reached the capital, the sooner the war would end and the fewer lives would ultimately be lost. By early April, the outskirts of Baghdad loomed. The city was defended by remnants of the Republican Guard, Saddam Hussein's most loyal and best-equipped units. They were dug in, prepared to fight, and determined to defend the capital at all costs. Yet the U.S. Army had momentum on its side. In a daring maneuver, American forces executed what became known as the Thunder Runs, armored thrusts directly into the heart of Baghdad. These were not cautious probes, but bold penetrations, designed to test Iraqi defenses and, more importantly, to demonstrate American dominance. The first Thunder Run on April 5th sent a column of tanks and fighting vehicles barreling down Highway 8 into the city. Explosions echoed through the streets as they tore through ambushes, knocking out resistance with overwhelming firepower before withdrawing. The message was clear. Baghdad was no longer impenetrable. 2 days later, the second Thunder Run became the decisive blow. Columns of American armor stormed into the city once more, this time pushing deeper, smashing through barricades and seizing key intersections. The battles were chaotic, ferocious, and unrelenting. Iraqi fighters struck from alleys, rooftops, and hidden bunkers, but the U.S. Army's firepower and discipline carried the day. With tanks stationed in front of the presidential palace, the symbolism was unmistakable. The seat of Saddam's power was now under American control. For the soldiers on the ground, it was both exhilarating and surreal. They were inside Baghdad, a city that for years had been an icon of defiance, now trembling under the treads of their tanks. Television images captured the moment that defined the fall. In Fairbold Square, Iraqis and American forces worked together to topple the statue of Saddam Hussein. The massive bronze figure crashed down, cheered on by crowds who kicked and pounded the fallen monument. Around the world, those images became the symbol of victory, of liberation, and of a dictator's reign brought to its knees. Yet behind the celebration was a sobering truth. Toppling a statue was not the same as rebuilding a nation. For the soldiers who had stormed Baghdad, their mission was shifting. The invasion had ended, but the occupation was just beginning. The storming of Baghdad in 2003 was a feat of military speed and precision unlike many in history. In just 3 weeks, a modern army had dismantled the defenses of a nation, overthrown its government, and seized its capital. The U.S. Army's use of shock and awe, combined with rapid armored thrusts, demonstrated a mastery of maneuver warfare that would be studied for decades. It was, by every tactical measure, a stunning success. Yet history would show that the hardest battles were not those fought in open desert or on the streets of Baghdad, but in the years that followed, when an insurgency rose from the ashes of a fallen regime. For the soldiers who fought, the memories of those weeks would remain forever vivid. The searing heat, the roar of engines, the blinding flashes of battle, the moments of fear and triumph, all blended into an indelible mark on their lives. They had stormed a capital, toppled a dictator, and written themselves into the annals of military history. But they had also witnessed the costs, the chaos, and the consequences of war up close, and those lessons carried as much weight as any victory. As Baghdad fell, the world looked on with awe, fear, and uncertainty, for it was clear that history had pivoted in those moments, and the reverberations would be felt for generations. The storming of Baghdad was not just the fall of a city. It was the opening act of a long and turbulent chapter, one that would redefine the Middle East and shape the destiny of nations far beyond its borders. And so, in the spring of 2003, the U.S. Army stormed Baghdad with speed, fire, and fury, toppling a regime in days, but leaving behind questions that no army could answer with tanks and firepower alone. Only time would reveal that capturing a city is far easier than holding the soul of a nation.